Jake Martinez stood in his kitchen looking at the stack of unpaid bills on the old wooden table. The numbers made his stomach hurt. $300 for electricity, $500 for the feed store, $800 for the bank loan that was already 2 months late. He had exactly $47 in his wallet and maybe 20 more in his checking account. The 28-year-old cowboy rubbed his tired eyes. He had been up since 4 in the morning taking care of his 2 remaining cattle. His grandfather's ranch in East Texas was falling apart piece by piece. The barn roof had holes that let rain pour through. The fence posts were rotting and falling over. The old water pump made scary noises every time he turned it on. Jake walked to the window and looked out at the brown grass in his pasture. It was almost winter, and he had not been able to buy enough hay for his animals. His neighbor, Tom, had offered to help, but Jake was too proud to ask for charity. This land had been in his family for over 60 years. His grandfather had built this place with his own hands after coming back from the war. 3 years ago, when Grandpa Joe died, Jake thought he could make the ranch work. He had big dreams then. He wanted to raise cattle and maybe some horses. He had saved up $10,000 from his job at the feed store in town. That money was gone now, spent on emergency repairs and vet bills. Jake picked up the foreclosure notice that had come in the mail yesterday. The bank wanted their money by Christmas or they would take the ranch. That gave him exactly 6 weeks to find $12,000. He might as well try to find $1 million. It would be just as easy. His cell phone rang. It was his sister, Maria, calling from Dallas. "Hey, big brother, how are things going?" she asked in her cheerful voice. Jake did not want to worry her. She had her own family to take care of. "Everything is fine," he lied. "Just working hard as always. I was thinking maybe you could come visit us for Thanksgiving. The kids miss their Uncle Jake." Jake smiled for the first time that day. He loved his nephew and niece, but he could not afford gas money to drive to Dallas. "Maybe next year, Maria. I have a lot of work to do here." After he hung up, Jake sat down heavily in his grandfather's old chair. The leather was cracked, and the springs squeaked, but it still smelled like Grandpa Joe's pipe tobacco. Jake remembered sitting in the same chair as a little boy, listening to stories about the ranch and the horses they used to have. His grandfather had been a real cowboy who worked on big ranches all over Texas before he saved enough money to buy this place. Grandpa Joe always said that the land would take care of Jake if Jake took care of the land. But Jake felt like he was failing at both. The wind was picking up outside. Jake could hear it whistling through the gaps in the old house. The weather. Man on the radio had said a big storm was coming. More rain meant more leaks in the roof. He had buckets placed around the house to catch the water, but they were never enough. Jake walked to his bedroom and opened the closet door. In the back, behind his old rodeo gear, was a shoebox full of memories. Pictures of him and Grandpa Joe working together, ribbons from county fairs, a deed to the ranch that was now almost worthless because of all the debt. He pulled out a picture of himself at age 8, sitting on a big brown horse with Grandpa Joe standing beside them. Jake had learned to ride on that horse. Its name was Rusty, and it was the gentlest animal Jake had ever known. They had to sell Rusty when Jake was 12 because they needed money for Grandpa Joe's medicine. Jake put the picture back and closed the shoebox. He was not going to cry. Cowboys did not cry, Grandpa Joe always said. But sometimes Jake felt so alone and lost that he wanted to sit down and cry like a little kid. Outside, the wind was getting stronger. Jake could see dark clouds moving in from the west. He needed to check on his 2 cows and make sure they had shelter. Bessie and Mabel were old girls, but they were all he had left of what used to be a herd of 20 cattle. He put on his worn-out jacket and his grandfather's old cowboy hat. The hat was too big for him, but it made him feel closer to the old man. Jake stepped outside into the cold wind. The temperature was dropping fast. This was going to be a bad storm. Jake walked to the small shed where his cows spent the night. Bessie looked up at him with her big brown eyes. She was a good cow who had given him 3 calves over the years. He had to sell the calves to pay bills, but Bessie never seemed to hold it against him. "Hey, girl," Jake said softly, patting her neck. "Looks like we are in for some rough weather tonight." He checked their water and made sure they had enough. Hay to last through the storm. The old shed was not much, but it would keep them dry. Jake wished he could say the same about his house. As he walked back toward the house, Jake looked around at the ranch that might not be his much longer. The old oak tree where he used to climb as a boy. The creek that ran along the back of the property. The hills where he and Grandpa Joe used to watch the sunset together. Maybe it was time to give up. Maybe he should sell what he could and move to the city like most young people did. He could get a job in an office somewhere and forget about being a cowboy. But every time he thought about leaving, he heard his grandfather's voice telling him to never give up on his dreams. Jake went inside and made himself a sandwich for dinner, bologna and cheese on white bread. It was not much, but it was all he could afford. As he ate, he looked out the window at the storm clouds getting darker and closer. He did not know that in just a few hours, 3 unexpected visitors would arrive at his door and change his life forever. The storm hit Jake's ranch like a freight train just after midnight. Rain pounded against the windows so hard it sounded like someone throwing rocks at the glass. The wind howled around the old house, making the walls shake and the lights flicker, on and off. Jake lay in his bed listening to water drip into the bucket he had placed in the corner of his bedroom. The roof leak was getting worse. He pulled his blanket up to his chin and tried to go back to sleep, but the storm was too loud. A loud crack of thunder made him jump. Then the lights went out completely. Jake fumbled around in the dark until he found his flashlight on the nightstand. The yellow beam of light made long shadows dance on the walls. He got up and looked out his bedroom window. He could barely see anything through the heavy rain. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up his property for just a second before everything went dark again. Jake hoped his cows were safe in their shed. Another flash of lightning, and Jake thought he saw something moving near his front porch. Probably just a tree branch blowing in the wind. But then he heard a sound that made him stop and listen carefully. It was a horse. A horse was crying out somewhere in the storm. Jake quickly put on his jeans and boots. He grabbed his rain jacket from the closet and his flashlight. The sound came again, louder this time. It was definitely a horse, and it sounded scared and in trouble. He opened his front door and immediately got hit by a blast of cold wind and rain. The storm was even worse than it sounded from inside. Jake stepped onto his covered porch and shined his flashlight around the yard. Lightning lit up the sky again, and Jake could not believe what he saw. Standing right in front of his house was the biggest horse he had ever seen in his life. It was a beautiful black and white horse that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, and next to the big horse were 2 smaller horses that looked like babies. The horses were soaking wet and shivering in the cold. The big horse looked right at Jake with eyes that seemed to be asking for help. Jake had grown up around horses, and he could tell when an animal was desperate. "Easy there, girl," Jake said softly, stepping slowly off the porch. "What are you doing out here in this storm?" The big horse took a step toward him. She was huge, probably the biggest horse Jake had ever seen. Her coat was black with white markings on her face and legs. Even in the storm, Jake could tell she was a beautiful animal. The 2 smaller horses stayed close to their mother. They were young, maybe 6 months old. One was black like its mother, and the other was brown with white spots. Both babies were shaking from the cold and fear. Jake looked around for any sign of where these horses had come from. There were no horse trailers in sight, no trucks or cars. These horses had somehow appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the worst storm Jake had seen all year. The mother horse took another step toward Jake and made a soft sound. She was asking for help. Jake could see it in her eyes. These animals needed shelter, and they needed it now. But Jake had a problem. His barn was falling apart. The roof had big holes in it and half the walls were missing boards. It would not keep these horses dry or warm. The old shed where his cows stayed was too small for 3 horses. Lightning flashed again, followed by thunder so loud it made Jake's ears ring. The little horses pressed closer to their mother, and she moved closer to Jake's porch. She seemed to understand that the house was the only real shelter around. Jake looked at his front door, then back at the horses. He had never heard of anyone keeping horses in their house. It sounded crazy. But these animals were going to freeze to death if he did not do something fast. "This is probably the dumbest thing I have ever done," Jake said to himself. He opened his front door wide and stepped back. Come on, girl. Bring your babies inside where it is warm and dry. The big horse looked at the open door, then at Jake. She seemed to understand what he was offering. Slowly, carefully, she walked up the 3 steps to Jake's porch. The wooden boards creaked under her weight, but they held. Jake backed up into his living room. Come on, it is okay. The mother horse stepped through the front door and into Jake's house. Her babies followed right behind her. Jake could not believe what he was doing. He had 3 horses standing in his living room. The horses looked around, at the furniture and walls like they were trying to figure out what kind of strange barn this was. The mother horse was so tall her ears almost touched the ceiling. Jake was going to have to move some furniture around. Okay, let me get you guys set up, Jake said, talking to the horses like they were old friends. First thing, let me get some towels to dry you off. Jake went to his bathroom and grabbed every towel he owned. He came back and started gently drying off the mother horse. Her coat was thick and beautiful, but she was soaking wet and cold. As he worked, the horse stood perfectly still like she understood he was trying to help. The baby horses shook themselves like dogs, spraying water all over Jake's living room. Under any other circumstances, Jake would have been upset about his house getting wet. But these animals needed help, and that was more important than his furniture. Jake moved his coffee table and chairs to one side of the room. He went to his bedroom and pulled all the blankets off his bed. He spread them on the floor to make a soft place for the horses to lie down. I do not have any horse food, Jake told them. But I can get you some hay from the shed in the morning, when this storm passes. The mother horse nuzzled Jake's shoulder with her big soft nose. It was like she was saying thank you. The baby horses explored the living room, sniffing at everything and looking out the windows. Jake sat down in his grandfather's old chair and watched the 3 horses make themselves at home. The mother horse lay down on the blankets, and her babies curled up next to her. For the first time since the storm started, they looked peaceful and safe. Outside, the wind continued to howl and the rain kept falling. But inside Jake's little house, 3 horses were warm and dry. Jake smiled as he watched them. He had no idea how he was going to explain this to his neighbors, but he did not care. He had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered. When Jake woke up the next morning, he thought he had been dreaming about horses in his house. Then he heard a soft snorting sound from his living room and remembered everything was real. He got out of bed and walked to the living room. The 3 horses were still there, lying on his blankets like giant pets. The mother horse lifted her head when she saw Jake and made a gentle sound like she was saying good morning. Well, good morning to you too, Jake said with a smile. I guess you guys are real after all. The storm had passed during the night. Sunlight was coming through the windows, making the horses' coats shine. In the daylight, Jake could see just how beautiful these animals were. The mother horse was clearly a special breed, with perfect markings and a kind face. Jake looked around. His living room. It was a mess. There were muddy hoof prints on his wooden floor. His furniture was pushed against the walls. Horsehair was floating in the air. But somehow, Jake did not mind. Having these horses here made his lonely house feel alive. The baby horses got up and started walking around the room, looking at everything with curious eyes. One of them found Jake's bookshelf and started sniffing the books. The other one discovered Jake's television and stared at its reflection in the black screen. You guys are probably hungry, Jake said. Let me go get some hay from the shed. Jake put on his boots and jacket and went outside. The storm had knocked down some tree branches, and there were puddles everywhere. But the air smelled fresh and clean. His 2 cows, Bessie and Mabel, were safe in their shed and looked happy to see him. Jake brought several armloads of hay into the house. The horses seemed to know what it was right away. The mother horse ate politely, taking small bites, and chewing carefully. The babies were messier, dropping hay all over the floor and getting it stuck in their whiskers. Jake also brought in a big bucket of fresh water. He had to refill it 3 times before all 3 horses had drunk enough. The mother horse was very thirsty. She must have been traveling for a long time before the storm hit. After the horses had eaten, Jake sat down to think about his situation. He had 3 valuable-looking horses living in his house, and he had no idea where they came from. Someone must be looking for them. These were not wild horses. They were too well fed and too tame. Jake decided to call the sheriff's office to report finding the horses. Maybe someone had called about missing animals. "Sheriff's office," said a woman's voice when Jake called. "Hi, this is Jake Martinez out on County Road 15. I found 3 horses on my property last night during the storm. I was wondering if anyone had reported missing horses." "Let me check," the woman said. Jake could hear her typing on a computer. "What do they look like?" "Well, there is one really big black and white horse, looks like a draft horse, and 2 smaller ones that look like her babies." I do not see any reports about missing horses like that. But the storm knocked out phone lines all over the county. People might not have been able to call yet. Can you describe the big horse a little more?" Jake looked at the mother horse, who was lying peacefully on his blankets. "She is huge, probably, the biggest horse I have ever seen. Black with white on her face and legs, very gentle and well-trained." "Sounds like a Clydesdale," the woman said. "Those are expensive horses. Someone is definitely looking for them. I will put out a notice and let you know if anyone calls." After Jake hung up, he realized he needed names for his temporary guests. The mother horse looked like royalty with her proud bearing and beautiful markings. "I think I will call you Duchess," he told her. The black baby horse was bold and energetic, always moving around and exploring. "You look like a Thunder to me," Jake said. The brown and white baby was quieter and stayed close to his mother. "And you can be Lightning." Duchess seemed to approve of her name. She touched Jake's hand with her soft nose when he said it. Over the next few days, Jake developed a routine with his unusual housemates. He would wake up early and bring fresh hay and water into the house. The horses had learned to be very clean, and they never made messes where they should not. Jake moved all his furniture to his bedroom and made the living room into a temporary stable. He put plastic sheets down to protect his floors and opened windows for fresh air. It was not a perfect setup, but it worked. The horses seemed happy with the arrangement. Duchess was incredibly smart and gentle. She learned to duck her head when walking through doorways. Thunder and Lightning treated the house like their playground, but they were careful not to break anything. Jake's neighbors started to notice something was different. Mrs. Peterson from next door called to ask about the strange sounds coming from his house. "Oh, that is just my radio," Jake lied. He was not ready to explain that he had horses living in his house. But it was hard to keep the secret. One day, the mailman knocked on Jake's front door just as Thunder was looking out the window. The mailman's eyes got very wide when he saw a horse head staring back at him. Mr. Martinez?" the mailman called. "There seems to be a horse in your window." Jake came to the door and tried to act normal. "Oh, that. Yeah, I am just watching him for a friend." The mailman looked confused but handed Jake his mail and left quickly. Jake knew he could not keep this secret much longer. But every day he spent with Duchess, Thunder, and Lightning made him more attached to them. They were the best company he had ever had. Duchess seemed to understand when Jake was worried about money or the ranch. She would come over and rest her big head on his shoulder like she was trying to comfort him. Thunder and Lightning filled the house with energy and joy. They played together like puppies, chasing each other around the living room and taking naps in the afternoon sun that came through the windows. For the first time since his grandfather died, Jake did not feel alone. His house felt like a home again. The bills were still piling up and the bank still wanted their money. But somehow those problems did not seem as big when he had 3 beautiful horses depending on him. Jake started to hope that no one would claim them. Maybe they could stay with him forever. Maybe this was exactly what his ranch needed to come back to life. But deep down, Jake knew that dreams like this did not come true for people like him. 2 weeks had passed since the horses moved into Jake's house. He had gotten used to waking up with Thunder and Lightning playing in his living room, while Duchess watched them like a careful mother. But Jake knew he needed to try harder to find their real owner. He decided to take pictures of the horses and post them online. Jake was not very good with computers, but his neighbor's teenage son, Tommy, helped him put the photos on Facebook and some websites for missing animals. "Wow, Mr. Martinez, that is a really beautiful horse," Tommy said when he saw Duchess. "She looks like she could be worth a lot of money." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Tommy showed him some websites about Clydesdale horses. "Look at this. These horses can cost $50,000 or more. Sometimes even $100,000 for really good ones. Jake felt his stomach drop. If Duchess was worth that much money, her real owner would definitely want her back, and they would probably have lawyers and police to help them get her. "Let me help you research her markings," Tommy said. "Every horse has different markings, like fingerprints for people. If we can find her registration papers online, we might be able to find out who owns her." Tommy spent an hour looking at horse registry websites while Jake watched nervously. Finally, Tommy found something. "Here she is," Tommy said, pointing at his computer screen. "Her name is Duchess Royal Bell. She was born 5 years ago in Kentucky. Look at this." Jake read the information on the screen. Duchess had won prizes at horse shows. She was from a famous bloodline of champion Clydesdale horses. Her babies would be worth thousands of dollars each just because of who their mother was. It says here she was sold to a breeding company in Oklahoma 2 years ago, Tommy continued, but there is no current address listed. Jake felt sick. These were not just any horses. They were valuable animals that belonged to someone with money. Rich people who owned horses like this would have no trouble taking them away from a poor cowboy who could barely pay his bills. Over the next few days, Jake tried calling the breeding company in Oklahoma. The phone number was disconnected. He called the horse registry and they said they could not give out owner information without legal papers. Then Jake got a call that changed everything. "Mr. Martinez, this is Detective Williams with the county sheriff's office. I understand you have some horses that you found during the storm." Jake's heart started beating fast. "Yes, sir, I reported them over 2 weeks ago." "Well, we have had some interesting developments. Can I come out to your ranch this afternoon to take a look at these animals?" "Of course," Jake said, even though he was scared about what this meant. Detective Williams arrived at Jake's ranch in an unmarked police car. He was a big man with a friendly face, but Jake could tell he was serious about his job. "I have to say, Mr. Martinez, I have been doing this job for 20 years, and I have never gotten a call about horses living in someone's house," the detective said with a small smile. Jake opened his front door and let the detective inside. Detective Williams stopped and stared when he saw Duchess lying on blankets in the living room with thunder and lightning playing nearby. "Well, I will be," the detective said. "That is definitely her." "Her?" Jake asked. "You know who she is?" "This horse was reported stolen from a transport truck 3 weeks ago. The truck was carrying her and her foals from Oklahoma to a new owner in Louisiana. During that big storm we had, the truck driver stopped at a gas station and someone stole the trailer with the horses inside." Jake felt confused. "But I found them wandering around my ranch. They were not stolen. They just showed up." "I believe you," Detective Williams said. "What probably happened is the thieves realized these horses were too famous to sell easily. Duchess here is well known in the horse world, so they just let the horses go somewhere and hoped they would wander off." The detective walked around, Duchess looking at her markings. "The problem is we now have 3 different people claiming to own these horses. The original owner in Kentucky who sold her, the breeding company in Oklahoma who bought her, and the new owner in Louisiana who paid for her but never received her." Jake's heart sank. "What does that mean for me?" "Well, legally, you have been taking good care of abandoned animals. You reported finding them right away. You have fed them and kept them safe. But until the courts figure out who the real owner is, these horses are basically evidence in a criminal case." "Evidence?" Jake asked. "The horse theft is a felony because of how much these animals are worth. We estimate the 3 horses together are worth over $100,000. Jake sat down hard in his grandfather's chair. $100,000. That was more money than he had ever seen in his life. "What happens now?" Jake asked quietly. "Well, the good news is that you are not in any trouble. You did everything right. The bad news is that this legal mess could take months to sort out. In the meantime, someone needs to take care of these horses." Detective Williams looked around the living room. "I have to say this is the strangest animal care situation I have ever seen. But these horses look healthy and happy. Are you willing to continue caring for them while the lawyers figure things out?" Jake looked at Duchess, who was watching him with her intelligent brown eyes. Thunder and lightning had stopped playing and were listening to the conversation like they understood what was happening. "Yes," Jake said without hesitation. I will take care of them as long as they need me to. Good. The county will provide money for feed and veterinary care while this case is pending. You will not have to pay for anything. After Detective Williams left, Jake sat on the floor next to Duchess and petted her neck. She put her big head in his lap like she always did when she could tell he was worried. I do not know what is going to happen to us, girl, Jake said softly. But whatever happens, I want you to know that these have been the best 2 weeks of my life. Thunder came over and nuzzled Jake's hand. Lightning lay down next to his mother and closed his eyes for a nap. Jake realized that for the first time in months he was not worried about money or losing the ranch. All he cared about was keeping these 3 horses safe and happy, even if he could not keep them forever. But in his heart, Jake was already starting to hope that maybe, somehow, this story would have a happy ending for all of them. 3 months had passed since Duchess, Thunder, and Lightning moved into Jake's house. The legal battle over who owned the horses was still going on, but Jake had settled into a comfortable routine with his unusual housemates. The county had been true to their word about paying for feed and vet care. For the first time in years, Jake was not worried about money for basic needs. The veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Chen, came by every 2 weeks to check on the horses and had become a good friend. I have to admit, Jake, Dr. Chen said during one of her visits, I was worried when I first heard about horses living in a house. But these 3 are the healthiest and happiest horses I have ever seen. Jake had made improvements to accommodate his guests. He had installed better ventilation in the living room and put down special flooring that was easier to clean. The horses had learned the house rules perfectly. They knew where they could go and where they could not. Duchess had become Jake's constant companion. She seemed to understand his moods and would come comfort him when he felt sad or worried. Thunder and Lightning had grown bigger and stronger, but they still acted like playful children. The story of the cowboy with horses in his house had spread around the county. People drove by just to see if the rumors were true. A local newspaper had written an article about Jake and the horses. A television news crew had even come to film a story about the unusual living situation. Jake was getting used to the attention, but he still felt nervous about what would happen when the courts finally decided who owned the horses. 3 different lawyers were fighting over Duchess and her foals, and none of them cared about what Jake wanted. On a cold February morning, Jake was outside feeding his cows when he saw a car coming up his driveway. It was a nice car, newer and cleaner than anything his neighbors drove. Jake wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward the house. An elderly woman got out of the car. She was small and thin with white hair and kind eyes. She looked to be in her 70s, but she moved with energy and purpose. She was wearing a nice coat and carrying a leather purse. Mr. Martinez? She said in a soft voice with a slight accent. My name is Margaret Whitfield. I believe you have been taking care of my horse. Jake's heart started beating faster. Your horse? Duchess, Royal Belle, Margaret said. Though I see you have been calling her just Duchess. That is what I used to call her too. Jake studied the woman's face. She did not look like the other people who had claimed to own the horses. The lawyers and business people had been cold and demanding. This woman looked sad and hopeful at the same time. Would you like to see her? Jake asked. Margaret nodded. I have been looking for her for 2 years. Jake led Margaret to his front door. Before opening it, he turned to her. Just so you know, this might seem strange. The horses live in my house. Margaret smiled for the first time. Young man, I have been around horses for 60 years. Nothing about horses surprises me anymore. Jake opened the door and called out, Duchess, you have a visitor. The big horse lifted her head from where she was lying on her blankets. When she saw Margaret, something amazing happened. Duchess got up quickly and walked straight to the elderly woman, moving faster than Jake had ever seen her move. Margaret started crying as soon as Duchess reached her. The horse put her head down so Margaret could hug her neck. Margaret whispered something in the horse's ear that Jake could not hear. Hello, my beautiful girl, Margaret said through her tears. I have missed you so much. Thunder and Lightning came over to investigate the stranger. Margaret petted them gently while still holding on to Duchess. These are her babies, Margaret said. They are beautiful. She was pregnant when I had to sell her. Jake felt his stomach drop. You are here to take them back. Margaret looked at Jake with tears in her eyes. That is what I thought I wanted when I started looking for her. But now I am not so sure. She sat down on Jake's couch, and Duchess lay down on the floor beside her. Margaret kept one hand on the horse's neck while she talked. My husband Charles and I bred Clydesdales in Kentucky for 40 years, Margaret said. Duchess was born on our farm. She was Charles's favorite. He called her his princess. Margaret paused to wipe her eyes. Charles died 3 years ago. I could not take care of the farm by myself. I had to sell all the horses to pay for his medical bills and keep our house. Jake sat down in his grandfather's chair and listened. I sold Duchess to what I thought was a good breeding farm in Oklahoma. They promised to take good care of her and let me visit sometimes. But when I tried to call them 6 months later, they said they had sold her to someone else. Margaret's voice got angry. They sold her like she was just property. They did not care that she was special. They did not care that she had been part of our family. So you have been looking for her ever since? Jake asked. I hired a private investigator. I called horse farms all over the country. I posted her picture on every website I could find. When I saw the news story about a cowboy in Texas with a Clydesdale in his house, I knew it had to be her. Margaret looked around Jake's living room. I have to say, this is not what I expected to find. Jake felt embarrassed. I know it is weird, but when I found them in the storm, I did not have anywhere else to put them. Weird? Margaret said. Young man, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Look at her. Jake looked at Duchess, who was lying peacefully next to Margaret like she had never left her side. She trusts you completely, Margaret continued. Do you know how rare that is? Duchess was always cautious around strangers, but she loves you. I can see it in her eyes. I love her too, Jake said quietly. I love all three of them. Margaret was quiet for a long time, just petting Duchess and watching thunder and lightning play. Mr. Martinez, she finally said, I need to ask you something important. What are your plans for the future? For this ranch? Jake did not want to admit that he was probably going to lose the ranch. I am working on some things, he said. Margaret smiled. I know about the foreclosure notice. I know about your money, troubles. I told you I hired an investigator, remember? I wanted to know everything about the person who was taking care of my horse. Jake felt his face turn red. Then you know I am probably not the best person to be taking care of valuable horses. Actually, Margaret said, I think you might be exactly the right person. But first I want to tell you why I am really here. Margaret Whitfield reached into her leather purse and pulled out a thick folder. She set it on Jake's coffee table and looked at him seriously. Jake, I hope you do not mind me calling you Jake. I have been investigating you for the past month. Jake felt nervous. Investigating me? When I found out where Duchess was, I could have just called the police and demanded they give her back to me. I have all the papers to prove she was stolen from me, legally speaking. But I wanted to know what kind of person had been taking care of her first. Margaret opened the folder and pulled out several papers. I hired a private investigator to learn about you. I hope you are not angry. Jake did not know what to say. No one had ever investigated him before. What did you find out? I found out that you are exactly the kind of person my husband Charles would have wanted to take care of our horses. Margaret's voice was warm and kind. Do you want to know what I learned? Jake nodded, even though he was scared of what she might say. I learned that you have never missed a day of work in your life, even when you were sick. I learned that you sold your truck to pay for veterinary care for a neighbor's sick horse. I learned that you have been taking care of your grandfather's grave every week for 3 years, even though the cemetery is 50 miles away. Jake felt his face turn red. He had no idea anyone knew about those things. I learned that you turned down a good job in Dallas because you promised your grandfather you would keep his ranch, Margaret continued. I learned that you have been giving free riding lessons to children in town, even though you need the money. How did you find out all that? Jake asked. Small towns talk, Jake. When you ask the right questions, people tell you things. Your neighbors think very highly of you, even if you are too modest to realize it. Margaret pulled out more papers from her folder. I also learned about your money troubles. The foreclosure notice, the unpaid bills, the fact that you have been eating one meal a day so you could afford feed for your cattle. Jake looked down at his hands. He felt ashamed that this nice woman knew how poor he was. Look at me, Jake, Margaret said gently. Jake looked up. Margaret's eyes were kind, not judgmental. I also learned something else very important. I learned that my husband Charles left me more money than I could ever spend in my lifetime. Jake did not understand what she was trying to tell him. Charles was not just a horse breeder, Jake. He was also a very successful businessman. When he died, he left me our farm, our house, and several $1 million in investments. Jake's eyes got wide. Several million? Charles always said that money was just a tool. The important thing was to use it to help good people do good things. Margaret smiled. I think he would like you very much, Jake. Margaret pulled out a different set of papers. I have been thinking about this for weeks, ever since I found out where Duchess was. I am 73 years old. I am too old to run a horse farm by myself, but I am not too old to help someone else do it. I do not understand, Jake said. I want to make you a business proposal, Margaret said. But first I need to ask you some questions. Do you love working with horses? Yes, ma'am. More than anything. Do you think you could learn about breeding and training horses if someone taught you? I would love to learn, Jake said honestly. Do you believe that horses deserve to be treated with love and respect, not just as property to make money? Jake thought about how Duchess had comforted him when he was sad, and how Thunder and Lightning trusted him completely. Yes, ma'am. Horses are not just animals, they are friends. Margaret smiled the biggest smile Jake had seen from her. That is exactly what Charles used to say. She opened the folder to a new page. Jake, I want to offer you a partnership. I want to buy your ranch from the bank and pay off all your debts. I want to build a proper horse facility here, and I want you to be my partner in a new business. Jake could not believe what he was hearing. What kind of business? A horse rescue and breeding operation. We would save horses that have been abandoned or mistreated, just like you saved Duchess and her babies. We would give them good homes and train them to be working horses or family pets. Margaret pulled out pictures of horse farms in Kentucky. We would also breed special horses like Duchess. Her babies would help pay for the rescue work. Jake looked at the pictures. They showed beautiful farms with green pastures and modern barns. This would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Charles left me enough money to do this right, Margaret said. But money is not the hard part. The hard part is finding someone who truly cares about horses. Someone who would rather live in a house with horses than let them freeze in a storm. Jake felt dizzy. This was like a dream, but better than any dream he had ever had. Why me? Jake asked. You could hire professional horse trainers, people with college degrees and years of experience. Margaret reached over and petted Duchess, who had been listening to their conversation like she understood every word. Because Duchess chose you, Jake. In all my years with horses, I have learned that they are excellent judges of character. If Duchess trusts you enough to live in your house, then you must be a very special person. Margaret stood up and walked to the window that looked out over Jake's property. Besides, I have been watching you for the past hour. I see how Thunder and Lightning follow you around. I see how Duchess looks at you. These horses do not just trust you, Jake. They love you. Jake felt tears starting in his eyes. What would I have to do? You would be my partner, not my employee. We would make decisions together. I would teach you everything Charles taught me about breeding and training horses. You would be responsible for the day-to-day care of the animals. Margaret turned back to face Jake. And of course, Duchess and her babies would stay with you. I could never separate them from you now. It would break their hearts. Jake looked at Duchess, who seemed to be smiling at him. Thunder and Lightning had stopped playing and were watching him expectantly. There is one more thing, Margaret said. I am not just offering you a business partnership. I am offering you a chance to honor your grandfather's dream of having a successful ranch. and I am offering myself a chance to honor my husband's dream of helping good people take care of horses." Jake stood up and walked over to Duchess. He knelt down and put his arms around her big neck. She nuzzled his cheek gently. "What do you think, girl?" Jake whispered. "Should we trust this nice lady?" Duchess made a soft sound that seemed to say yes. Jake looked up at Margaret. "When do we start?" 6 months after Margaret Whitfield walked into Jake's life, his ranch looked like a completely different place. Where there used to be broken fences and dying grass, there were now green pastures and white wooden fences that stretched as far as Jake could see. The transformation had happened faster than Jake ever thought possible. Margaret had not wasted any time once Jake agreed to be her partner. Within a week, she had lawyers working to buy Jake's ranch from the bank and pay off all his debts. Within a month, construction crews were building new barns, fences, and facilities. Jake stood on his front porch on a warm spring morning, watching thunder and lightning run through the new pasture with a group of other young horses. They were almost full-grown now, tall and strong like their mother. But they still came running to Jake whenever he called their names. Duchess was in the main pasture with 3 other mares that Margaret had brought from Kentucky. The big horse looked happy and content, but she still came to the house every evening to visit Jake. Some habits never changed. "Good morning, partner," Margaret said as she walked up the porch steps. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder full of papers. "Morning, Margaret," Jake said with a smile. "What do we have on the schedule today?" Margaret handed him a coffee and sat down in the rocking chair they had put on the porch. "Well, we have 5 new rescue horses arriving this afternoon. A family of horses that were abandoned when their owner lost his farm." Jake opened his notebook where he kept track of all the horses on their ranch. They now had 22 horses, and more were coming every month. Word had spread that Second Chance Stables was a place where horses could find new homes and new hope. "What do we know about the new ones?" Jake asked. "A mother horse and her 4 babies," Margaret said. "They have been living in a field with no shelter for 2 months. The local animal control officer says they are skinny but healthy." Jake made notes in his book. "I will get the quarantine stall ready. Dr. Chen can check them over when they arrive." Dr. Sarah Chen had become the full-time veterinarian for Second Chance Stables. She had even moved her practice to a new building they had built on the ranch property. She took care of not just their horses, but horses from all over the county. "There is something else," Margaret said, looking at her papers. "We got a call from a television producer in New York. They want to do a documentary about our rescue operation." Jake felt nervous. He still was not comfortable with all the attention their ranch was getting. Newspapers and magazines had written stories about the cowboy who started a horse rescue operation with horses that lived in his house. People came from other states just to see their ranch. "Do we have to do the television thing?" Jake asked. Margaret laughed. "Jake, you have been on television 5 times in the past 6 months. I think you can handle 1 more interview." "That is different. Those were local news people. This is national television. The more people who know about our work, the more horses we can help," Margaret said gently. "Besides, you are very good at telling our story." Jake had learned that Margaret was right about most things. She had taught him so much about horses and business over the past 6 months. But more than that, she had become like a grandmother to him. She made sure he ate proper meals and got enough sleep. She worried about him working too hard. "Speaking of our story," Margaret continued, "I have some news about the legal case with Duchess." Jake looked up from his notebook. The courts had finally decided who owned Duchess and her babies. Jake had been nervous about the decision for months. The judge ruled that since Duchess was stolen property, and since the original theft case was never solved, ownership goes back to the last legal owner, Margaret said. "Which is you," Jake said. "Which is me," Margaret agreed. "But I have already filed papers to transfer ownership of all 3 horses to Second Chance Stables. They now officially belong to our partnership." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. "So they can never be taken away?" "Never," Margaret said firmly. "Thunder and Lightning are registered as breeding stock for our operation, and Duchess is officially our foundation mare." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the horses graze in the morning sun. Jake still could not believe how much his life had changed. A year ago, he was about to lose everything. Now, he was part of a successful business that was helping horses all over Texas. "Margaret," Jake said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really choose me? I know what you said about Duchess picking me and everything, but there must be other people who are good with horses." Margaret was quiet for a long time before she answered. "Do you remember what you told the newspaper reporter when he asked why you let horses live in your house?" Jake thought back to that interview. "I said that when someone needs help, you help them. It does not matter if they have 4 legs or 2 legs. That is exactly why I chose you, Jake. Most people in the horse business think about money first and horses second. You think about horses first and money second." Margaret pulled out another paper from her folder. "That reminds me, we need to talk about money." Jake groaned. Money was still his least favorite subject, even though they now had plenty of it. "Our first-year profit report," Margaret said, handing him the paper. Jake looked at the numbers and could not believe what he was seeing. "We made this much money?" Thunder and Lightning's first babies sold for $15,000 each. Duchess had 2 more babies this spring that are already promised to buyers for $20,000 each. Plus, we received over $50,000 in donations from people who read about our rescue work. Jake shook his head. "I still cannot believe people pay that much for horses." "They pay that much for special horses from good bloodlines," Margaret corrected. "And all of our horses are special because they are loved and well-trained." A truck pulling a horse trailer was coming up their driveway. It was their new rescues arriving. "Time to get to work," Jake said, standing up. "Jake," Margaret said, "there is one more thing. I have been thinking about expanding our operation." "Expanding how?" "I want to buy the ranch next to us. Old Mr. Thompson is ready to retire, and his land would give us room for 50 more horses." Jake looked out at their current pastures, which were already full of horses. 50 more horses is a lot of work. That is why I want to hire some help. Maybe 4 or 5 full-time workers who love horses as much as you do." Margaret stood up and joined Jake at the porch railing. "What do you think, partner? Are you ready to run the biggest horse rescue operation in Texas?" Jake watched Thunder and Lightning running with their new friends in the pasture. He thought about Duchess, who had started this whole adventure by trusting him during a storm. He thought about his grandfather, who would be so proud to see the ranch successful again. "I think," Jake said with a big smile, "we are going to need a bigger barn." 2 years after the storm that changed everything, Jake Martinez stood on the hill overlooking Second Chance Stables and could hardly believe his eyes. The ranch that had once been falling apart was now home to over 60 horses, all living in beautiful pastures with modern barns and the best care money could buy. It was early morning and Jake was doing his favorite part of the day, the morning walk to check on all the horses. Thunder and Lightning, now fully grown and magnificent, came galloping over to greet him like they did every morning. They were both fathers now, with babies of their own running around the pastures. "Good morning, boys," Jake said, patting their annex. They were as tall as their mother now, but they still acted like playful children around Jake. Duchess was in the main pasture with her newest baby, a little filly with the same beautiful markings as her mother. At 7 years old, Duchess was still the queen of the ranch. All the other horses respected her, and she still came to visit Jake at his house every evening. Jake's house had been rebuilt and expanded. It was now a beautiful ranch home with big windows that looked out over the pastures, but the living room still had special flooring and ventilation, just in case any horses ever needed to come inside again. "Jake!" called a voice from behind him. He turned to see Dr. Sarah Chen walking up the hill with her medical bag. "How is our new patient this morning?" They walked together to the medical barn where a young horse was recovering from surgery. The horse had been found abandoned with a broken leg, but Dr. Chen had been able to fix it. In a few weeks, he would be running with the other horses. "He looks much better," Jake said, watching the young horse eat his breakfast. "I think he is going to make a full recovery." "Thanks to you," Dr. Chen said. "You stayed up with him for 3 nights straight." Jake shrugged. "That is what you do for family." That was how Jake thought of all the horses on the ranch now, as family. Each one had a story, and each one had found safety and love at Second Chance Stables. As they walked back toward the main barn, Jake saw Margaret's car coming up the driveway. Even at 75, she came to the ranch every day. She said it kept her young to be around the horses. "Good morning, you two," Margaret called as she got out of her car. "Are you ready for our big day?" Today was special. They were hosting the annual Texas Horse Rescue Conference at their ranch. People from all over the state were coming to learn about their rescue methods and see their facilities. But even more special was the ceremony they had planned for this afternoon. The state of Texas was giving Second Chance Stables an award for outstanding service to animals. The governor himself was coming to present the award. "I still cannot believe the governor is coming here," Jake said. "Believe it," Margaret said, with a smile. "What you have built here is something truly special, Jake." What they had built together was more than just a horse ranch. It was a place where people came to learn about caring for animals. They offered free classes to children about horse safety and care. They provided jobs for 12 full-time workers and many part-time volunteers. Jake had also started a program for troubled teenagers to work with the horses. Many young people who had problems with anger or sadness found peace working with the gentle animals. Jake understood how horses could heal broken hearts because they had healed his. "Jake," Margaret said, "there is someone here to see you." Jake looked around but did not see any strangers. "Who?" "Follow me," Margaret said with a mysterious smile. She led Jake to the main barn where a crowd of people was gathering. Jake saw his sister Maria and her children, his neighbors from town, Dr. Chen, all the ranch workers, and dozens of volunteers who helped at the ranch. But in the center of the crowd was someone Jake had not expected to see. It was Tommy, the teenager who had helped him research Duchess on the computer 2 years ago. But Tommy was not a teenager anymore. He was wearing a military uniform. "Surprise!" everyone shouted. Tommy walked over to Jake with a big smile. "Hi, Mr. Martinez. I wanted to thank you before I ship out to my new assignment." "Tommy, I did not know you joined the Army." "You inspired me," Tommy said. "Watching you take care of those horses when you had nothing taught me about service and sacrifice. I decided I wanted to serve my country the way you serve these animals." Jake felt tears in his eyes. He had no idea that his actions had influenced anyone that way. "There is more," Margaret said. She pulled out an official-looking document. "Tommy has established a scholarship fund for young people who want to study veterinary medicine. It is called the Second Chance Scholarship." Jake was overwhelmed. The shy teenager who had once helped him post pictures of horses online was now a soldier who was helping other young people achieve their dreams. The ceremony that afternoon was beautiful. The governor gave a speech about how Second Chance Stables represented the best of Texas values: hard work, compassion, and never giving up on those who need help. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he looked out at the crowd of people who had come to celebrate their work. He saw Margaret in the front row looking proud. He saw Duchess watching from the pasture with thunder and lightning beside her. 2 years ago, Jake began, I was about to lose everything. I was alone, broke, and ready to give up on my dreams. Then one stormy night, 3 horses showed up at my door asking for help. Jake paused and looked at Duchess, who seemed to be listening to every word. I thought I was helping them by letting them into my house. But they were really helping me. They taught me that when you open your heart to help others, amazing things can happen. The crowd applauded, but Jake was not finished. Margaret always says that Charles, her late husband, believed money was just a tool to help good people do good things. Well, I have learned that love is also a tool. When you use love to help others, it comes back to you multiplied. Jake gestured toward the pastures full of horses. Every horse here has a story of being lost or abandoned or hurt, but every horse here also has a story of being found and loved and healed. That is what Second Chance Stables is really about. Second chances for everyone. That evening, after all the visitors had gone home, Jake sat on his porch with Margaret. They watched the sun set over their ranch while dozens of horses grazed peacefully in the golden light. Charles would be so proud, Margaret said softly. Grandpa Joe too, Jake replied. Duchess walked up to the porch and put her big head over the railing, asking for her evening pets. Jake scratched behind her ears while she made happy sounds. "Thank you, girl," Jake whispered. "Thank you for changing my life." As the stars came out overhead, Jake thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A poor cowboy who had almost lost everything had become a successful businessman who was helping animals and people all over Texas. But the best part was not the money or the fame or the awards. The best part was waking up every morning surrounded by animals who trusted him completely, working alongside people who shared his dreams and knowing that he was exactly where he belonged. Jake Martinez had found his purpose, and it had all started with opening his door to 3 horses in a storm.